This is the first episode of Ramadi Days by Theophilus Tor. Ramadi Days is my recollection of the time that I spent in Ar Ramadi, Iraq, 2004, with 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines, 1st Marine Division, Company E. This is a realistic telling my recollection of being a black man in the United States Marine Corps by way of Liberia, Africa, to America, grown up in California, then joining the United States' most lethal fighting force, United States Marine Corps. There's going to be tellings of killing, gunfights, watching murder, watching death, getting blown up, a young black man's mentality in a Republican administration. So some of this is going to be jarring. Some of this is going to be funny, not purposefully so, but just the type of person I am. There's always a little bit of humor in my recollections. And again, this is my recollections. So anyone listening that wants to reach out to me and talk to me more about this, I encourage you to. But without further ado, let's get to it. Ramadi Days, Episode 1. We had got back from Okinawa, Japan, and I remember when I was with my unit in Okinawa, Japan, the senior Marines were all complaining about not being a part of the first push in OEF, OIF. They were saying things like, it's like dating the hottest chick in high school, going to prom with her, and not getting a chance to do anything after prom. There was a bloodthirst that a lot of my senior Marines had. I didn't really have that bloodthirst. Tell you the truth, I joined the military because in Sacramento, I was a street punk. I was robbing people. I was shooting people's houses up. People were shooting my house up. And the straw that broke the camel's back was a girl that I had been dating, Audrey Lou. She had broke up with me, and it wasn't her fault. Karma came and caught me. I had a problem with faithfulness to the women that I was dating, and she didn't know, but I had a little bit of fun in a hotel with a couple of girls that came from the Bay Area. And when I say a little bit of fun, I mean that it was a promiscuous orgy that I was a part of with two bisexual girls and their friends. So Audrey at the time, she was really religious, and she went on some retreat, some Christian retreat. And when she came back, the energy had just changed. That energy called karma, and we broke up, and I was devastated because even though I couldn't keep it in my pants, I was convinced at the time, being a young man, 18 years old, that I was in love with her. And again, karma being real, it turned up to where we broke up. I remember the breakup too. First major heartbreak. My older sister and I shared an apartment at the time. I couldn't even leave my room. I laid in bed. I was just listening to a bunch of old school love songs from the 60s. And a friend of mine at the time had a cousin that was a recruiter in the Marine Corps. And he asked me, hey man, my cousin recruits for the Marine Corps. You want to join the Marine Corps? Now this is after 9/11. This is 2001. And to tell you the truth, my whole thinking was, all right, let me go into combat. Let me get shot at. That's going to teach Audrey, and she's going to want me back. And to be real, me being a street punk, I was failing out of college. Felt like the walls were closing in on me, and I wanted to leave Sacramento and see the rest of the world. So 2 weeks after having that conversation with my friend and talking to his cousin, I was standing on the yellow footprints at Marine Corps Recruit Depot, San Diego. Now, the good thing about my life is I had a father that used to beat the living tar out of me. And what that did was toughen me to where I could fight the other kids in the neighborhood and not be afraid of physical confrontation, because I would have to fight a grown man most of the time for simple mistakes. My father had gone through a civil war in Liberia, and he didn't know it, and I didn't know at the time, but when he was able to reconnect with me in America, he was suffering from PTSD. And the signs of PTSD weren't really diagnosed. But as someone that suffers with PTSD, I could tell that my father was going through PTSD. So my dad loved me, and I have a great father. But at the time, he didn't know what he was dealing with and how to separate the trauma. And I usually used to get on the receiving end of that trauma. So it toughened me up. It toughened me up in my neighborhood, toughened me up in school. I was able to fight. I was able to handle guns even before the military. My mindset was just different. And I don't think if my father had not gone through what he went through, I wouldn't be ready for the military. So boot camp, I graduated the leader. In the Marine Corps, they call it the guide. And Marine Corps is just a bunch of alpha males looking to fight each other. When I joined the military, my military operational specialty, what they call the MOS, I was supposed to be an operations clerk, which is a glorified secretary, someone that prepares the firing ranges and different training exercises for the infantry. But because I graduated guide and I was so motivated, I was able to switch my military occupational specialty from operational clerk to the infantry. And that's how I ended up in 1st Battalion. That's how I ended up in 1st Marine Division, 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines, Echo Company. Now, going to Iraq, we didn't know that we were going to go to Iraq. It was either Afghanistan or Iraq. And 3 weeks before going to Iraq, my dad's oldest sister, Danielette, I watched her die in front of me inside a hospital room in Lancaster. She had complications with cancer. And I remember when she died, yeah, I remember that day in the hospital. My uncle, her husband, had showed me how to use a suction bottle to remove excess fluid from around her neck. She had a tracheotomy. She had a hole in her neck, and I guess the tracheotomy wasn't the right size. And so when fluid would build up around the hole in her neck, I would use a suction bottle to clear the excess fluid around the hole in her neck. And my uncle wanted to go home and take a shower and come back. And I was told to watch the heart monitor. If it went over, I believe 220, then that was a bad sign. So it was me and my aunt, and I'll talk more about her later in other episodes. But it was me and my aunt in the hospital room, and I remember using the suction bottle to remove the excess fluid from around her neck. And I saw the heart rate monitor shoot up. And then the machine started beeping. And I don't know the amount of time it took, but then nurses came in the room. And I remember going to the corner and watching the nurses trying to resuscitate her. And then I just remember her dying. So I called my uncle. I called my uncle and grandma, and they rushed back to the hospital. I remember my grandma and my uncle praying to Jesus to return my aunt's soul to her body. That was extremely traumatic for me, because I was always raised as a Christian. Not a Christian now, but I was raised as a Christian back then. And I remember how my grandma was just yelling at God to put her daughter's soul back in her body. So before going to Al Ramadi, Iraq, I had already seen one of the most important people to me die in front of me. And call it the universe, call it God, call it what you want. But I believe that I went through that experience so that the other deaths would not affect me as much as my aunt. My aunt breastfed me. We're an African family. My aunt treated me like her first child. Out of all her siblings, I was the first child. My dad had me at 17, so I was the first official child. I was the first nephew. And before the war kicked off, I remember just the amount of love that everyone dealt with me. I was the only son of an only legitimate son. And in our culture, that meant that I was the one that was going to inherit everything. So I believe that God had prepped me to see that so that I would be able to keep my shit together when I was in Iraq. So the unit was gracious. They gave me a little bit of leave to go to the funeral. And I went to the funeral, came back shortly after we deployed. I remember few days before we deployed, I called up some girls that I knew because I was trying to have sex before going to war. Didn't know if I'd come back or if I come back with all my members. So I was just trying to get laid before I went to war. Fortunately, couldn't seal the deal. There was a friend of mine that I grew up with, and she had the biggest breast ever that I'd seen. And I was trying to close the deal. Couldn't close the deal. It's neither here nor there. Went to Iraq. Got to Kuwait first. Somebody in Kuwait, they committed suicide inside of a chapel in Kuwait. And they said that they did it, or their letter said that they did it because they had stole some shave gear or some hygiene gear, and they didn't feel that they could go into combat being trusted by their brothers if they could do something like that when we weren't in combat. I didn't really understand what we were getting ourselves into. We were told that we were going for a security and stability operations. And so we trained to basically be glorified police when we got there. We were supposed to keep the peace while the United States government was rebuilding the community. But we didn't know that our unit, more importantly, our commanding officer, wanted us to seek out confrontation. More on that later. So when we got to Ramadi, first, us being Echo Company and having some history where some of our higher ups goofed by sending our flak jackets, sending our flak jacket inserts ahead of us, we were kind of punished and we were put on the worst post in Ramadi. It was called Combat's Outpost, aka Devil's Outpost. There was hardly any electricity there. Infrastructure was really bad. But us being United States Marines, we kind of felt like we were going to get the shit into the stick anyways. And the first, I'd say 3 weeks, first 3-4 weeks over there was miserable from the standpoint of operating. We weren't sleeping like we wanted to, which kind of sucks because if you know you're not going to get any sleep, your body can adjust for it. But if you're told you're going to get sleep and you don't get it, it's even worse because your body was already planning on getting sleep. So I remember It's only a handful of black people inside our unit. And I existed in this weird space where I had gone to college for a year before joining the military. So a lot of my senior Marines, I was the same age as them. Even though I was a lance corporal, the non-commissioned officers, the corporals and sergeants, were the same age as me. So I didn't look at them like they were older brothers or even senior Marines. Growing up on the streets in Sacramento, a lot of the guys that were my quote unquote senior Marines, tell you the truth, I didn't think I would hang out with them in Sacramento. Not because they were bad people, but just because we had a different idea of what it was to be a man, and we grew up in different climates, different scenarios. These were guys coming from two-parent households. These were guys coming from the heartland of America, really patriotic. They joined the military because they were patriotic. They didn't join the military because, they had broke up with some girl. And so there were a lot of clashes because I grew up in an inner city and a lot of these guys grew up in small towns. Nothing wrong with that, but there's a difference because Sacramento was a melting pot. There were a lot of immigrant populations in Sacramento that came from conflict zones all over the world, and they were in the city because they had claimed political asylum or they were seeking the green card or visa because of what they had gone through in their country. So I had grown up knowing people that were Sikh, people from Kazakhstan, people from Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Hmong, Thailand, Cambodia, people from conflict zones in South America, a lot of people from conflict zones on the African continent. And in Sacramento, it wasn't really about skin color. It was mostly about where you fell on the poverty line. So if your parents were rich, then you had a different experience and different outlook. You looked down on people that were in a different earning bracket. It wasn't about skin color. And I had grown up poor until I was about 14 years old, and my father was able to get a high paying job in information technology. But the grown up poor experience is what I always remembered. I didn't look at myself as a rich kid. I looked at myself as a poor kid. So it was difficult getting along with my senior Marines because I just felt like they had some of them had a bigoted viewpoint, and it being the Marine Corps runs on hatred, racism, also brotherhood, but definitely racism. And it was difficult being part of the handful of black Marines. So there was me, there was Reed, there was Tex, there was Corporal Cook, a guy named Castillo. He was as dark as us. And then there were the Hispanic Marines. Some of them were proud of their Mexican race, and some of them weren't, like our lieutenant. Our lieutenant, his last name was Valdez with a Z, but he talked like a white man. And the only time you heard him use a Hispanic accent, a Spanish accent, is when he was calling the name of other Latino Marines. So he would say things like, all right, today we're going to go out on a patrol with Corporal Ramon or Corporal Hernandez. And me and the other black Marines would look at each other like, is this guy real? This guy can't be real. But nevertheless, that was the kind of mentality that existed in our platoon. I wasn't at odds with all my senior Marines. Some of them were great leaders, like Roy Thomas, like, Robert Hernandez. But then some of them were ass kissers, like Nathan Apple. And me and Apple used to butt heads a lot because I just didn't like the ass kissing. To be honest, though, it's hard seeing things from another person's perspective when you're 19 years old, 19, 20 years old. That's how old I was when I was in Iraq. So I had some close friends. The nickname of 2-4 was Magnificent Bastards. Me and my little crew, DeMarcus Reed, Anthony Soto, Jose Texador, we had another name for ourselves. We called ourselves the Belligerent Bastards because we bucked against the system. Not to be difficult, but I remember one day talking and arguing with my senior Marines and also with the platoon sergeant. His name was Staff Sergeant Jeffrey Craig. And this was in Kuwait, matter of fact. We were waiting outside in formation. And when you're in formation, as a Marine, you're supposed to exhibit discipline, keep your body locked up, waiting for your platoon sergeant to show up. But my senior Marines they were playing what the Marine Corps calls gay chicken. They were grabbing each other's asses and exhibiting the lack of discipline. And I just got upset. And I told all of them that they were fucking clowns. And they didn't like that, as you can imagine. And they wanted to get in my face. But again, growing up, I love when someone got in my face. I always looked for altercation. And right before it came to us fighting, our platoon sergeant saw what was happening. And he asked me, "Hey, Tor, what the fuck is wrong with you?" And I told him, "Hey, we're all going to go to Iraq and put our lives in danger. I can't follow someone that's grab assing and showing lack of discipline when we're supposed to be disciplined out there. How am I going to follow them?" And my platoon sergeant, he told them that I was right. He also yelled at me and said, "Don't ever disrespect the people that he put in as leaders." But he realized that I was right. And so that was my attitude. I'm a man out here just like you. I got to take bullets just like you. So I'm not going to waste 1 second while I'm in Iraq biting my tongue for anything. If I got a problem with you, I'm going to let you know I got a problem. And so that gave me, Reed, Soto, and Tex, who were my junior Marines, that gave us the reputation of being belligerent. But I didn't do it to be belligerent. I just did it because in combat, your mind is clear. The next second, the next minute, the next hour is not guaranteed. And when you're living like that, you're living at what I call 100%. So in the Marine Corps, when you see something wrong, they call it pop and smoke. And so I was pop smoke Tor for my whole deployment to Ramadi, Iraq. So there were some cool things that happened at combat outposts. I remember a junior Marine of mine. We were all inside the squad bay, and our platoon sergeant was trying to talk to us before we started patrolling in Ramadi. And he was just trying to tell us how to conduct ourselves amongst the population because we don't want to make enemies, or we didn't want to make enemies. We wanted to make friends so that we could get tips and we could keep the area safe while the area was rebuilding. And that was a weird briefing. First of all, Jeffrey Craig, supposed to be a man's man, a drill master when he was training recruits, was trying to tell us that his mom taught him to sit down to take a piss on the toilet. That was odd. In my mind, I was saying, well, that's the first problem. A woman's not supposed to teach you how to piss. And then he started going into the perception that we need to enforce when we're out in town. And a younger Marine, his name was Carter, he mixed up the saying possession is 5/10 of the law with perception is reality. Because Staff Sergeant Craig said, "Okay, you guys remember, perception is," and then Carter said 9/10 of the law. And so we started laughing. I said, "No, man, that's possession." But perception was reality out there. And little did we know that we went out there for security and stability, but it turned out to all out fighting, house to house, room to room, street to street. There were insurgents that flew in from all over the world, Africa, Russia, other parts of the Middle East, because our pocket was supposed to be the Super Bowl of what was called jihad. Now, our higher ups knew this, but we didn't. And that's why the deployment turned into what it turned into. So I'm going to go ahead and stop there. This is just me getting you ready for Ramadi Day stories. Again, my name is Theophilus Tor, and this has been the first episode of Ramadi Days. Goodbye.